Our video today is going to be on adding and subtracting decimals. I want to go through some keys with you here as we go through this. So one of the main keys that you want to do when you're adding or subtracting decimals is line up your decimals. Key number 2, line up your decimals. Key number 3, you want to fill in your zeros to fill in gaps. And we'll talk about those. So when you talk about filling in zeros, we talk about what we call trailing zeros. Or trailing zeros are the zeros that come in behind the number. It doesn't change the value of the number. So putting these two zeros back here does nothing to that number. It's still 2.2. But it gives us an opportunity to fill in where we need to. Preceding zeros are the ones that come in front. So when you look at preceding zeros, they're the ones that will fill in the front side. And again, they don't mean anything. They just take up a place so that we have everything neat and orderly when we start subtracting. So when we start subtracting, and adding, doesn't matter, what we're going to do is a couple steps. So one is they're going to give you the problem that looks like this. It's laid out. Setup is we're going to line up our decimals. So we're going to take our decimals and we're going to line it up for this. So when you do that, you're going to fill in your zeros where you need to. So if you notice, I have the zeros in different colors. Those are the places that I need to have for that. So as I look at what I'm doing, I'm taking my zeros, filling in the spaces, and then I can add them. So that's step number 3 is I'm going to add the decimals, or I'm going to add my numbers and kind of forget about the decimals. The last thing I'm going to do is number 4, and that is simply take my decimals in a line and bring them down. So when I get my answer, after I've added my numbers, I can just add my decimal. So everything's in line. So it doesn't matter, we could have put the 0.3478 on the top, we could have put the 4.63 on the bottom. When it's adding, it doesn't matter. We're going to fill in the preceding and the trailing zeros here as we go. So if we look at another problem that we have, we're given it as 15.6 plus 2.37. So when you look at that, we're going to line this up. And again, we could put either one first. So I'm going to start with my decimals. I'm going to put in what I have on the right-hand side. I'm going to start with 15.6 first. And then I'm going to put in what I have for this one. So I start with 2, my decimal, 3, 7, and 5. And I'm going to make sure I put my adding symbol. From here, I'm going to fill in my trailing zeros and my preceding zeros. And then I'm just going to go ahead and add. So now I can forget about the decimal. And I can just go, well, that's 5, that's 7, 6 plus 3 gives me 9, 5 plus 2 is 7, 1 plus 0 is 1. So really, we're adding it to nothing, which that's why we can put the 0 in there, because it represents nothing. It's just a place to fill in an area. Last step is we're going to make our decimal come straight down. So we line up our decimals, and then we bring it down into our answer. And that's our adding of decimals. When we get to subtraction, some of the keys that we have here, simply same as addition. Line up your decimals. Once you line up your decimals, now we have to be careful with this one, because we have to make sure that the big number goes on top. So we can actually subtract. So in our example of 4.63 minus 0.256, we're going to again fill in with a a trailing 0. You can put a preceding one in there. I would probably leave those out, but you could put one in there as you go. In this case, we're going to have to borrow. So this 0 here at the trailing part is rather important. You're going to need that 0 there because we have to borrow something to get so we can subtract from the 6. So that becomes our 0 with our 10. We take 1 away from our 3 and make it a 2. We cannot subtract 2 from 5, so we have to borrow here from our 6. So we're going to take that 1 and put it with this to make it 12. That becomes a 5. Our 4 can be subtracted through without any problem. So when we subtract it, we have 10 minus 6, which is 4, 12 minus 5, which is 7, 5 minus 3, which is 2, 4 minus 0 is just 4. So when you look at this, it's again the same type of setup. You're looking at lining up your decimals, and then when you're finished, bringing your decimal down in a straight line as you go. So if we take a look at our last example here, we have 27.37 minus 4.25. I don't need any trailing zeros because they're all in the same, they all have the same place values with numbers. I could put a preceding one in here. I'm going to choose not to. If you want to, you can. It doesn't change the value of 4.25. So there is no preceding decimals in there. We want to make sure that the larger number goes on top, and then we can subtract. So in this case, there is no borrowing in this problem as you go through it. So it's just a straight subtraction problem. Don't worry about your decimals until the end if you've got everything lined up. And when you're done at the end, bring your decimals straight down. So some of the things to think about as you go through this. Some of the keys for what we've talked about in this video. Line up your decimals. When you're adding, use preceding and trailing zeros. For step 3, when you're subtracting, use trailing zeros. You don't necessarily have to put the preceding ones there unless you want to. The larger number needs to go on top. Step 4, bring the decimal down into your answer, so bring it straight down from what you've got. And step 5, as always, the last step in the videos, make sure that you use your notes for this. So hopefully this will help you in getting through the adding and subtracting section. With your notes, you should be successful, and if not, please make sure that you keep asking questions.